Hey everybody, happy holidays before the Christmas and New Year's week. Good to see everybody who's here. Um, and I hope you're all having a good December so far. Haven't been like too buried in snow wherever you happen to be. I see Jody and Karen. Good to have you here. And we may have a smaller group, I think, because it is close to the holidays. But hopefully we'll have a nice rousing discussion as we often do. So starting out tonight, as I often do, I'll mention, I just noticed that John Cruth has not gotten the coming classes up for the Ryan Education Center on our website yet. So I'll just kind of mention again, if anybody's interested, I'm sure it'll be between Christmas and New Year's, or certainly by right after New Year's, those classes will be listed. Our classes for the Ryan Education Center, which are all online, start the first week of February. That's going to be the starting time. Jody, where are you that you have 70 degrees and 105-mile winds? I'm not quite sure where you happen to be, but we didn't quite have warm weather like that here in the Bay Area, but it's been rainy the last few days. Colorado, okay. So the classes I'm going to be teaching, for anybody who's interested, if you have never taken a course on and are interested in ghost hunting, I'm teaching a field investigations class, which is an 8-week class. Um, and then I'm also teaching a class on dreams with a focus on psychic dreaming and other altered states that relate to psychic abilities and phenomena. And I'll then be teaching a 4-week class looking at devices, technology, and proper way to use them and when they're just totally not useful at all. And also kind of going into the way some of them work and really don't work. And I see Paul is here as well. Holly's here. Great. Welcome, everybody. So those classes, again, my classes will be starting February, first week of February. Other classes, I believe we're also going to have a class on out-of-body experience, a 4-week class on that. And there'll be other classes being offered by others at the Ryan Education Center. If you happen to hear in the grapevine, around the grapevine, that there's something going on weird with the Ryan Center, which people often call the Ryan Institute, it's the same thing. Just know that the Ryan Research Center is no longer in the building it was in. Everything's been moved out. As far as I know, everything is gone for now. There's a new owner of that building. We were leasing space. We are now in the process of looking to buy space for the new incarnation of the Ryan Research Center, which we hope to have in the next few months. And I'll be making a big announcement about that. At some point, we'll be doing some things in Durham, North Carolina as well. All right. Excuse me, I do have a little bit of a cold, so I'll be clearing my throat a lot as we go through this, so please bear with me through this. All right, so I'll just start out by asking if anybody has anything they want to start with. I do have something that I was asked to talk about. Somebody did something up front. So anybody, Kathy, bring the darkness. Okay, Kathy Nadal is with us. That's good. So if anybody has anything right off the top of your heads, pop it into the chat. Otherwise, I'll jump into what I was asked to talk about or to address. And let me actually grab something. All right. So I guess I'm not seeing anything quite yet. So a book I've mentioned before, which only came out a couple months ago, is this book called Chasing the Dark. And Chasing the Dark is a bit of a history of, I know it's a little shiny there, but it's a little bit of a history of investigations, of psychical research and investigation for over 140 years. And it focuses heavily on one individual, a man by the name of Tony Cornell, who was with the field for well over 50 years. Um, if you can find a used copy of a book called Investigating the Paranormal by Tony Cornell, absolutely find that book. Phenomenal book, some of his best cases over the first 50-year period of his life. And he was a really interesting guy. I got to meet and spend a day with back when that book actually came out, Investigating the Paranormal came out. This book, Chasing the Dark, talks about how he got involved and what he just kind of, I'm not through the whole book, but pretty much his investigative process, what he thought about things, all of that. And it was pointed out to me that in the later part of the book, there was reference to something that I knew about back in the late 1990s. So in the 1990s and early 2000s, I was writing for Fate magazine. I was writing a regular monthly column. And at one point, there was a news piece by the editor, Phyllis Scaldi, who found something interesting around the year 2001. It was an article in a British newspaper quoting or referring to Tony Cornell, longtime investigator for the Society for Psychical Research, saying that there has been a decline in the late 1990s. Cases were not coming in as fast and furious or even as lightly as they were before. There was a decline in the UK in the number of cases he was getting and the SPR was getting. And the article drew a connection to cell phones, to the rise of cellular telephones. And in the article, it made it seem like Tony had concluded that the signals, the increasing cellular signals, the EM radiation in the world had increased, or at least in the UK, and that was interfering with ghost appearances and hauntings and things like that. And that actually spurred on, interestingly enough, Tony Cornell to leave a voicemail for me. I didn't get him directly on the phone at that time, but he was misquoted. I mean, that whole article was wrong. It was right and it was wrong. There was an interesting parallel with the development and the adoption of cell phones by so many people and the decline in reports. But it had nothing to do with EM fields. I mean, there's been no study and no indication that that has anything to do with it. Hi, Moho Hand 54, whoever you are. Don't recognize that handle. Um, so I just wanted to address this because it is talked about in the book. Um, I wrote something for Fate magazine in February 2001 that addressed this issue in the call with Tony. Maybe it was 2002. I think it was. In fact, now they think, no, it was 2001, February 2001. So here's the thing. We talk about investigations, we use EMF, electromagnetic field detectors, and most of the meters that are used in investigations are standard Gauss meters. Gauss is a measure of magnetic field, and they are all built to detect the magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields given off by electricity, electrical devices, by our technology, electronic technology. They are not built to pick up other forms of electromagnetic fields because there's a spectrum. For those of you who don't know, that light is electromagnetic in nature. Radio waves, microwaves, those are all electromagnetics and different frequencies on the spectrum. So it's a very, very narrow band of what the EMF sensors will actually pick up. Cell phones, we of course know about 4G and 5G. There's 6G. There's different parts of the frequencies. There are broadcast frequencies for AM and FM, all part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we've been bombarded with EM fields without even cell phones getting involved for decades, for many, many decades. That did not have anything to do with people not seeing ghosts or having problems with that. The one thing that, however, has happened, I think you can all relate to this, is that as cell phones came in, and especially after smartphones, the apps and everything. So first we start with phone calls, for those who are old enough, phone calls and texts on flip phones and things like that. You can do texting. People paid much more attention to their phones when texting started. Otherwise, you just waited for a phone call or you made a phone call. That's all it was. Yeah, 88 to 95. Okay. Um, that's a hint for who this is. All right. I don't know that that helps enough. Anyway, as texting came in, people paid much more attention, would look at their phones a lot more, especially when they got a text. As smartphones have come in, people are often, especially younger people, are totally buried in their smartphones. I just read something on, we have this thing called Nextdoor. I'm sure many of you have Nextdoor somewhere in your neighborhood, in your area. Somebody posted that she almost hit a kid who was on a scooter and was buried in her phone, breezed right through a stop sign and almost got hit because she didn't look up from her phone and didn't stop for the stop sign and continued on. It'd be worse if she even had headphones on. So the idea that we have had, at least for that initial period, a decline in reports of ghosts and hauntings may have to do with people not noticing things in their world. That's still the case today, even more so. However, one of the other reasons why many of us don't get, I mean, I hardly ever get a case at all. Um, is that Rob, perhaps? Mohand? Not sure who that is. Apartment. Okay. Um, the idea that somebody has a ghost experience, goes on the web these days, does a quick search on their phone, frankly, they're unlikely to get to me at this point. Part of that has to do with the fact that there are so many websites from so many ghost hunting groups on so many local levels that what I do, what the SPR does, what other folks do, unless looking for specific organizations, gets buried. Most of the ghost hunting groups out there have websites. They're active on Meetup and things like that. It's kind of low-hanging fruit. So we don't really get that many calls anymore. And then again, people don't call. I get a lot of emails here and there. Unfortunately, they're mostly um, maybe that's Brian. Must be Brian. Is that Brian? Who's Moho Hand 54? All right, now it just occurred to me it's probably Brian. My old buddy and old roommate Brian McCrae. Anyway, we don't get calls that much anymore, but the decline that Tony Cornell talked about may have had something to do with cell phones. It also may have had to do with media coverage at the time, because up to the point of cell phones coming in, and especially up to when the ghost hunting shows came in the early 2000s, calls did not slow down except at certain times of year. Before the internet, before Netscape, even before AOL, we would get a surge of calls typically at different times of year, mainly in September, October, because of Halloween. We get a surge of calls in the US, at least, in February because of February sweeps weeks on TV and ratings weeks for radio, and also in May. Those things. Um, Mojo Hand. Okay, that's it. Mojo Hand. All right. So when people talk about people not having experiences or not reporting them, there are a lot of reasons why people might report cases or ask for help, but I don't think they're coming to people in parapsychology these days. And they may not have been coming to people at the SPR or to Tony unless he was getting publicity. Because there were other amateur ghost hunters that were developing and getting publicity even in the UK in the late 1990s. So there's other tugs on those kinds of things. Jody, estimates of 50 to 75% of internet content is now AI and bots. Yeah, this goes to Sturgeon's law, actually even more so. So Ted Sturgeon, who I mentioned this before, was a science fiction writer, and Theodore Sturgeon, and he had a Sturgeon's law for science fiction, which was 90% of all science fiction is crap, but then again, 90% of everything is crap. And that certainly applies to the internet, and even more so now with AI and bots. Um, Things are automated. We're getting all sorts of crap going on. Um, so far, I have not had inquiries from bots about haunted things, but it won't be long, I'm sure. Now that I've said it, I'm probably will start getting those random emails. I'm certainly getting random emails that are most likely coming from bots and AI offering me publicity services for my book without mentioning what book it is or even my name in the email. Just generic spam that's coming through. It is kind of scary. It's easy to get sucked into this stuff. It is easy to get into conversation with AI bots as well, unfortunately, and you just have to watch out for scams at this point. It's difficult. Um, I will want to mention one other thing, which I have mentioned before. It's interesting that, with all the attention that's paid to smartphones and things, and a lot of people have their heads buried in social media all day, you're not going to notice things around you. Back in during the lockdown, even though that was still going on, there was a realtor study about a year after the lockdown that was published. Some articles about it were published, and a couple of real estate companies, associations of realtors, did a survey of their members, and found that the reports to realtors of people's homes being haunted went up like exponentially. And interestingly enough, um, the realtors were able to explain most of what was reported, because most of it had to do with the people noticing things about their homes they had never noticed before, because this is the first time so many people were locked in their homes for 24 hours a day for weeks on end. House settling noises, things like that. Um, the other part of the survey was that the older one was, the less likely you were to think your house was haunted. In other words, younger people were more likely to assume to not know what the sounds or what the other things were naturally occurring in the home, in their house, in their apartment, and other things. They assumed these were supernatural, paranormal, demonic, whatever it happens to be, because they didn't think about asking what else it could be. So, all really interesting from a reporting factor. But if you happen to read the book about Tony Cornell, Chasing the Dark, and you run across that piece about the decline of reports, yeah, that was the case for a while. I'm guessing that if we were able to get the number of reports to all the different ghost hunting groups all over the world, the reporting will have increased quite a bit over the years. All right, let's see here. When Skynet takes over, remember you voted for Kang, not Kodos. Okay. Yeah, I'll try to remember that, Jody. So far, I don't think has The Simpsons done an episode where AI takes over? Because, The Simpsons seems to predict everything. We'll have to see what happens with that. Okay. Kind of did my thing about the dropping of reports. One of the things I want to say that's important to know is, they get asked this all the time. Well, not all the time, but quite a bit in podcasts, and certainly by reporters, is, do we know how many people have experiences with ghosts every year? And all we know is the surveys that are done, the polls that are taken, what people believe in ghosts. We don't really know because people don't report them all the time. We've seen an upswing in UFO or UAP reports over the last 40, 50 years, certainly. And when I was in college, I started out as an astrophysics major. The astronomy department at Northwestern University was, and by the way, I eventually went over to anthropology, but the astronomy department was headed by J. Allen Hynek, who was one of the two leading experts on UFO or UAP activity in the world. Hynek was one, the other was Jacques Vallée. Jacques is still with us, Hynek is not. And what's interesting about what Hynek talked about, and this came up actually later on as well. I saw him again after I graduated. I saw him years later in the early 80s. He was speaking at a conference for the Committee for Scientific Investigation of the Claims of the Paranormal. In other words, he'd been invited by the skeptics to give a talk. He was not treated well, I will say that. Very, very patient man. They asked him, how can you possibly study UFOs? And in his talk before the Q&A, he had made this very clear. Unless you capture a UFO, in which case it's no longer unidentified, even if you don't know where it's from, unless you're studying UFO reports and potential evidence left behind by something. UFO reports are what we study. which includes evidence, maybe video and other things too. If you're doing UFO work, I don't do UFO work. But Hynek made the important point that the only thing that he could study were the reports that were actually coming in. In other words, what people reported. That was probably the tip of the iceberg because many people didn't know who to report to, or if they reported it to some law enforcement agency, called the airport, whatever, they might have been laughed at. There would be no reports. With ghostly stuff, same thing. We are studying reports, then we go to the location and see if the phenomena is still happening and what we can make of that, as well as looking for normal explanations. But we're starting with a report, and the report is of the utmost importance. If you don't have a report, you've got nothing, you don't have a ghost story. You got nothing to go on. That's important. And all too often, I see people in the ghost hunting world, depending on the TV show that they follow with their methodology. And this is something I went over with my students very heavily in my classes. We can't do without witness reports. I mean, there are rumors places are known to be haunted, right? How are they known to be haunted? Did somebody have an experience there or not? Because if nobody had an experience there, all you have is a potentially spooky old building or just a building with history. But that history might have ghost stories. That's still reporting. That's all, as the deniers of the TV shows love to say. That's anecdotal evidence. We can't accept that. Anecdotal evidence, witness testimony, even though there might be issues with witness testimony, is all we have to go on to do an investigation. If you don't have a ghost story, what are you investigating? And that is the report. So when reports start dropping, we have less to investigate. If there's more and more people doing the ostensible investigation or offering an investigation, whatever reports there are, and there are a lot of times people are not reporting at all for whatever reason, but they get spread thin and they don't go to everybody. And that may have been part of what happened with Tony Cornell back in the 1990s as well. All right, I'm going to go back to the Q&A here. Yes, Steven Spielberg's movie, which is called Disclosure Day, it's coming out, I think, this summer, having to do with UFOs. It looks like, I think it has to do with First Contact, actually, from what I've seen from the trailer. That'll be pretty interesting. Have poltergeist activities reduced? You haven't heard anything recently? I'm going to say it's probably the same as what I just mentioned. We're just not getting those reports coming to us. And my guess is, this is my guess, is that they may be going when they contact, again, go on the web and they start doing searching, they find a local ghost hunting group. All too often, those ghost hunting groups may immediately say poltergeist is an actual entity, and they go in and do their thing. And if they happen to get an EVP that's whatever it's interpreted as, they may label as negative and just leave it alone. I have gotten calls from people over the years, including seeming poltergeist cases, which, by the way, were already burned out by the time the people were contacting me. But this is a sadly not uncommon kind of call or email I've gotten from people over the years, especially in the last 20 years. We had the local ghost hunting group out here. They looked around, they used their devices, they say they got evidence, and multiple things can happen. They'll say, nothing's happening here. There's nothing going on. By the way, none of the devices seem to react in poltergeist cases at all. So they would probably find nothing and leave. In apparition and haunting cases, you might get some things seemingly in the environment at that point, some correlations. The people, so many ghost hunters love to play with the EVP, and if they get anything, this is again, an unfortunate situation where if it's anything on the audio that sounds like a growl or something gruff or something else, all too often it's interpreted as demonic. And too many of the groups will immediately say, well, we're not dealing with that. And they'll leave the people high and dry. So it's about who they report to. And I have not, we certainly had a poltergeist case that was referred to us by a local ghost hunter. referred to me, and then we actually ended up doing it virtually because it was going on during the pandemic, during the lockdown. Um, we wrote that up for the Journal of Parapsychology. There's actually a video presentation on the YouTube channel of the Parapsychological Association about this case that we did virtually with myself, Jerry Solfin, Brian Williams, and Beth Hedva working with the family. And I don't hear too much. Again, I don't get calls very often at all. And the emails I get are rather frustrating because they have very few details. And as soon as I start asking questions, and maybe these are from bots, as soon as I start asking questions, I rarely get a response. So I'll get people telling me that, they've got a ghost in their house and we need help. So lesson for everybody who goes out and who is dealing with emails and such. Um, Sadly, can you come to our house? That's about 50% of the time. Can you come out and investigate? My first question to them, I have two questions. Tell me more about, can you tell me more about what's happening? And number two, where in the US are you? Because all too often these folks don't even tell me what town or state, not even tell me what state that they're in, making the assumption that I can come out, to wherever. And there have been times, honestly, that I've just gotten frustrated because I'll get more detail about the activity. It sounds pretty interesting. Send back a note saying two things. Where in the US are you? And I need to please let me know either your phone number or let's arrange a time to talk via Zoom or on the phone because we must have a pre-interview to work through some things. Most of the time when I ask for phone number or Zoom setup, that's when the email disappears. They go off looking for somebody else. Sometimes it's the repeated asking for the city and state that seems to I guess make them annoyed or something, but it's really bizarre. All right, Holly, what would you suggest start to help a family you're working with that has experienced poltergeist activity? At least one of the family members has mental health issues. Oh, okay. So first of all, I would definitely do a little education with them. Explain that if it's physical activity only, we categorize this in the field as poltergeist activity, which is coming from a living person. You don't have to mention the mental health issue because that may have nothing to do with it, honestly. It could just as easily be a person with mental health issues who is experiencing that stress and issues that are unconsciously causing the activity. It also could be some other family member who is stressed out about the one family member with the mental health issue, or even the entire family dynamic, which makes it harder to figure out who the agent actually is. But the thing I would suggest to have them start doing right off the bat, even as you're talking about what this activity may relate to, is to have them write down, take notes, even audio record a narration of what happened, everything they can remember that's happened so far, when it happened, as best they can remember, and who was in the room or in the area where the activity happened. Get that all together. And then from the point you're calling them or talking to them or emailing them or conversing with them in any way, shape, or form, have them keep a journal, a log of, if they see something move or break or happen, write down on, December 22nd at 6:32 p.m. in the corner of the living room by the front door or nearest the front door, a vase slid across a table. In the room were myself and whoever else was there, to keep that track. And if they ask you why they need to do that, tell them that, especially with poltergeist activity, we're trying to figure out who done it. This is a mystery. We're looking for a pattern. We're not going to blame anybody because this is totally unconscious. That's important. Really unconscious. So we're trying to figure out how we need to work with the family itself to get it to stop. And the best way to do that is to identify the patterns and the people. And that would be the first thing I'd start with. Now, as far as the mental health issue, I would hope that they're dealing with that separate from the poltergeist activity, before, during, and after, all of that. And if you have any questions, Holly, you can always email me. Again, the email associated with this channel is just, just putting it in here. So it's either askprofparanormal@gmail.com or even just profparanormal@gmail.com. All right. So yeah, and if you have any questions, just feel free to, I'm happy to consult with you. Okay, all right, from Dave. Dave, I answered your question about Tony Cornell. Are you aware of any current poltergeist cases that are as dramatic as the famous ones? Not really. The virtual case that we had, the case that we dealt with virtually because we couldn't go down there because of COVID, it was in the Silicon Valley. There was a lot of activity, physical activity reported. Our paper in the Journal of Parapsychology, which, by the way, you can access on the Parapsychology Press website, or even just going through the Rhine Center, so Rhine, RHINE.org, and going to publications and going to the journal. You should be able to do a search for it. It was from 2020, papers in 2021, a 2021 issue. But we had Brian Williams went through with the family. They were keeping a log for us once I was in contact with them. And we had a lot of individual activity, some unusual activity, all very, symbolic of what was going on. And ended up being a case for counseling to some extent as well. So I wouldn't say it was big stuff, but it was a lot of stuff that was going on. And one of the family members was an engineer who was having I guess you could say, a mental disconnect with the activity because he didn't believe in this stuff until he saw it start actually happening. It caused a little bit of trauma, like some issues, some post-traumatic stress disorder stuff a little bit for him, just because it was in conflict with his way he looked at the world. So, but otherwise, current cases, I don't hear about them typically unless somebody's consulting with us, with me, or they're written up in journals. And I haven't seen any really good cases like that, big cases like that. Again, I'm not sure if they're coming to us at all, if they come to our attention these days. I just don't know what's actually happening with them because there's too much low-hanging fruit in the ghost hunting groups out there. All right, so we're halfway done tonight. Anybody have any other pieces they like to throw in? And I'll just mention with the poltergeist stuff, just remember that that word may be used by different people different ways. The term translates effectively, not exactly, to noisy ghost, but the Geist part of it is not an external entity. It is, for us, it's coming from a living agent. The term can be used, and I know it's been used in the UK in different ways. In the UK, it's often been used to describe any case with physical activity, whether there's apparitional activity, in other words, whether somebody sees a ghost or not. But then it gets kind of, so think of this, the poltergeist is the umbrella for cases involving physical activity, and then you can split it out. They split it out in the UK to living agent, which is what we normally call a poltergeist case here in the US, and apparitional connection. So basically possibly caused by an entity. But poltergeist cases rarely ever have, the way we look at them, they're just physical activity. They rarely ever have anything, any sort of visual or auditory apparitional type thing. When I say physical, that means that anyone present could experience it. That's not the case with an apparition. In apparition cases, not everybody present will see, hear, feel, sense the apparition because it's a psychic thing. When poltergeist activity happens, it's the mind acting on the physical world. So even if it's raps that seem to react to you when you ask a question, that if everybody's hearing it, if you can record it, that is truly psychokinesis. that's there as well. Okay, I'll pause for a moment and I do have a topic I can talk about for anybody who might be interested. Just kind of come up with a couple of people recently, and I'll just kind of give it a moment here, and it looks like I guess not. So, till I get a question, I thought maybe I could talk a little bit about, since this is actually something that I had a discussion with somebody recently, and also an article that Kathy Nadal sent a link to today. It kind of came up, which was kind of an interesting thing about a reading that she had given. And one of the things that we get asked in our field every so often, and I've actually taught a class that covers this as well. And I'll go to your question here in a moment, Jody. Is, with all, because let's face it, there are phony psychics and mediums out there, no question. There are phony lawyers out there. There are also unethical licensed lawyers. There are phony doctors out there. There are unethical business people. There are frauds and scams. Actually, these days, I'd say that most of the frauds and scams have nothing to do with psychics and mediums. They have to do with bots and other things. But if you went for a reading yourself, you can assess the reader and the reading pretty easily if you pay attention. And I'll go into that here in a moment. All right, Jody's asking, do you think a spirit can move objects psychically? Yes, on occasion. It's not a common thing. This is a really interesting thing that it's pretty clearly in the literature. If you go by the number of people who've had apparition experiences, if you go to the locations to look at the longer term apparitional activity, where an apparition and ghost seems to appear and interact, how much physical activity is there that's associated with that ghost? For most of these cases, there's little to none. And even in cases, so for example, a couple of my cases, specifically the Moss Beach Distillery, but more importantly, a case called the Banta Inn. It's a bar restaurant in Tracy, California. The apparition started being seen within a few days of the individual's death. It was the bartender, owner, manager. For years, nothing moved. Over time, it was probably about, trying to think how long this was, would have been like 12 to 14 years after the guy died. No, not that long. It was probably 8 years after he died that stuff started moving in the restaurant. And then more and more bigger, slightly larger stuff and more frequently. Almost as if he had to learn how to do it. At the distillery for decades, no one had seen any physical activity. And then in the 1980s, stuff started moving, directly connected to the apparition. Same thing in other cases, that it may not take years, it may take months, but it seems like if you're dead and you're without a body, you got to figure out how to do it. It's not an automatic, I know how to move these things. But by definition, psychokinesis is action by the mind. Apparitions, conscious entities have a mind. Therefore, if they move something, that is psychokinesis that we're dealing with as well. The biggest difference that I can say between apparitional physical activity activity caused by a ghost physically, and that in a poltergeist case is in apparition cases, it tends to be more purposeful and generally less destructive. There can be some destruction going on. I'll get back to that in a second, but generally less destructive. In poltergeist cases, it's usually chaos. So we have chaos and order, more ordered in apparition cases, more chaotic in poltergeist cases, the unconscious itself. I do know of cases where I can just think of a couple of examples of people who had called or I'd spoken to over the years in different parts of the country, actually several cases, following the similar kind of pattern. These people moved into a house and they started seeing this ghost. The ghost was bothering them, but they just were ignoring the ghost. And the ghost was showing up and trying to get their attention and more like that. And they kept on ignoring the ghost because they didn't want to get involved. It was too scary for them. And all of a sudden stuff started moving. And then eventually they were trying to ignore that. And then all of a sudden, like something will break or something else will happen, something big will happen, a door will slam, something they could not ignore. And they said, what do we do? I said, well, maybe if you started talking to the ghost, maybe it would stop doing that. Stop ignoring the apparition who's trying to get your attention. It could be as bad as a 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum for not getting what they want. But in every one of those cases that where I talked to people and this was escalating, when they started talking to the ghost or acknowledging, the physical activity stopped. Now they still had to deal with that ghost. That was a different situation, but it stopped the activity. So, at the Banta Inn, it's all mischievous. It's all fun and games. It's stuff that Tony, the ghost, used to do when he was alive. At the distillery, it's to get people to have, I think it's just for the mood. It's kind of a party thing. So ghosts do party tricks in some respects as well. I think that's kind of something to consider. So it's not without question, but that an apparition will move something. But if it's just physical, there's no other indication that there's a conscious entity behind it outside of a living person's unconscious. We push that towards the poltergeist thing. We work with the family. We work with the people, the living people. We don't. And by the way, I've taken mediums and psychics into cases with physical activity, poltergeist case, seemingly poltergeist cases. And even with activity happening in and around when we were there, they picked up no spirits. So not only is there no activity, no experience of an apparition in any way, shape, or form, not even a sense of presence. I sense somebody here with me. Not even that. But psychics and mediums don't pick up anything either. Unless they're good at reading people, in which case I've had the psychic say, oh, let's Lloyd, come over here. I can tell you who the probable poltergeist agent actually is. And that goes back to kind of doing readings as well. One thing to remember about getting back to kind of assessing a reading is before you see a psychic or medium, if it's a medium and you're going in to try to connect with somebody on the other side, that makes sense to go to a medium. If you want a medium to tell you your future, unless that medium also advertises that they do psychic readings or precognitive readings, you are barking up the wrong tree. And you're not gonna walk away being happy about that. Do actors or actresses who strongly associate with the character gain traits from that character? I'm not quite sure what that has to do with ghostly phenomena. Personality-wise, a method actor might take on too much of a character for a time. Jared Leto, Daniel Day-Lewis, they were like deeply immersed in the characters. Would have been interesting to have a psychic do a reading of that person while they were deeply immersed in those characters, if that's what you're talking about. Anyway, if you're going to see a psychic or medium, think about why you're going. What's your purpose? What are your expectations? What are the claims of the reader? And when I mean my claims, that includes things like people heard me talk about this. Are you going for advice about your future? And if so, what is the psychic claim about being able to predict the future? And oh yeah, I have a strong connection. Yeah, sometimes I would say that just going back to that question, it's more like the character is when the person is cast, the character may be more like the actor than the other way around. Yeah. All right. So if I'm going to go see a psychic and the psychic says to me, and I want to, I'm setting an appointment, I want a psychic who can predict the future, whether it's for love, money, otherwise for business or something like that, family, things like that. Those are the main reasons. Um, if the psychic says that they are 95% or even 80% accurate on predicting the future, my first question to that psychic before I even show up there would be, how do you calculate that? Have you followed up on every one of your predictions? Because that's the only way to say 80% are correct. And I can guarantee that they have not. Now, they may hear back from clients that they predicted something that came true, but not that all their predictions are true. You want to be careful with any psychic who claims any degree of accuracy with a percentage when it's next to impossible to, unless you do an analysis of every reading, to actually say that that's true. And I can guarantee again, they're not doing that. However, it is not without saying that sometimes when they say 95% accurate, they mean 95% of my clients come back again and again because they say I'm really good. That's customer satisfaction. And frankly, that's as good as accuracy to me. If I find out that some psychic is actually um, got repeat customers, as long as the psychic is aware that you don't want to see somebody every week or every month. I mean, I want to make sure that they're not also bringing them in to support their life or their livelihood, because there is a flip side of that. That's a good thing. All right, I'll pause for a second, go to Holly's question. Do you think it's possible that a spirit is trying to move objects or touch, has to relearn the proprioception sense, and that's why they may touch? Well, they're not really touching anything. You have to remember they don't have a body. Proprioception is about body sense. That is a form of it's our brains pretty much picking up what's our sense of our body in space. But without a body, you're only a mind. So it's not about proprioception because that doesn't exist. Um, it is about learning to move something with your mind, moving things with too or too little force. It's not about force, it's about connecting with the object. We're pretty sure it's not actual force that's involved. It's not like some energy beam coming out of your head. It is about connecting with the object and getting it to move through space. And we still don't know exactly how that works, whether it's using energy, whether it's doing something at the subatomic level, whether it is to kind of create a domino effect, whether it's causing a shift in the space that the object is in. We don't really know how that's all working. We don't have enough research in psychokinesis for that. Okay, back to getting a psychic reading. Um, as just a warning, there are a couple of warning signs. One of them was the percentage. That's not too bad, but just know that you want to hear from, always ask a reader, so whoever's doing the reading, what's your process? And a good medium will tell you what their process is. They'll tell you, a good medium will tell you, I may not connect with the person you want me to connect with because it's a two-way street. It's like making a phone call to a family home and you want to talk to your dad, but he's not home, your mom's home, so she picks up the phone and she can't put your dad on because he's not available or he's busy and he can't come to the phone. So it doesn't work that way. With psychics, maybe they can't connect with everything. And people do go to psychics mostly because they want to know the future. Psychics overly spend time, I think, sometimes in doing a personality reading, which should include what's going on in your life right now, not as much about what's happened in the future. But they also should tell you that the future is in motion. It is not definitive. It's not set in stone. What I tell you in this reading may cause you to have a different decision going forward or set up different situations. And so the future I tell you isn't going to come to pass because you can kind of take your own, it is free will in that respects. Back to the questions here. When your husband was stationed and you were stationed in Turkey, Turkish friend took your psychic healer. Long line, she said, I would live on an island 40 years later. I did. Time sensitive. Yeah. I had a reading from a guy named M.B. Dykeshorn, who there was a book called My Passport Reads Clairvoyant, which came out in the 70s. He was a psychic from the Netherlands who consulted with Interpol quite a bit. And he was on a book tour. My uncle Herb Norman was a radio newscaster for WMCA radio in New York. And when I was in, I think it was when I was in college, Dykeshorn was in town. My uncle was subbing for someone on the weekend. He normally didn't do talk shows, but he had Dykeshorn on, so I got to be there for the interview with Dykeshorn, and then Dykeshorn offered to do a reading for me. It was really a kind of a bizarre reading because he's standing up and he's saying, I was dating someone, and he started describing her, and then he starts describing her father, which was bizarre. Um, who, as it turns out, my mother had known years before in high school. But then he starts imitating him, like doing impressions. He starts doing impressions of people that I knew. I mean, it was pretty clear that unless he had a detective following me around and checking out my whole life at that time, it would have been hard for him to do actual impressions. There was no YouTube, there were no videos of people. And then he did say to me, "You want to be a writer?" And my uncle might have mentioned that to him, so I kind of said, "Yeah." And he said, "I know you want to write fiction, but your first book is going to be nonfiction. It's going to be about parapsychology." I said, "Okay." And I really was. I was in college. I mean, I wanted to write science fiction. I hadn't even thought about writing a parapsychology book, even though I was headed towards parapsychology at that time. And then he said, "It's going to come out when you're 30 years old. You're going to think it's going to come out a little bit sooner, but it's not going to come out until you're 30." Okay. So I did write some science fiction. I submitted a few short stories. They never got accepted. The mid 1980s roll around, 84 rolls around. It is Ghostbusters year. Because of Ghostbusters, I got a huge amount of publicity for myself in the JFK University Parapsychology program. And I get contacted by a literary agent who was a friend of one of my students. I write this book after getting a contract, which became ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists. Originally, we were hoping to get it out in 1985 when I would have been 29. It got delayed and was published when I was 30. So that was a really interesting prediction, very far in advance. He could not have claimed that was accurate. In fact, I think he had died by the time my book came out, so it would not have been part of his stats. But that's one of the ones. I've had a few that have been actually true, just really interesting. On the other hand, so many things can be changed with psychics in general. Um, Comparing psychics with athletes is enlightening. Not no, there are no human abilities that are in static numbers. That's correct. Brian's heard me talk about this. The fact is that any psychic who claims to be able to do something all the time, or any psychic who claims to be able to do everything, and I've met people who make claims, oh, I can do clairvoyance, oh, I can do precognition, I can move on, I can do healing, one thing right after another. It's like, so you're a polymath. There are very few people on the earth who can do multiple things in the arts and science, in physical activity, all of that. Um, Comic book characters, yes, but not actual living people who can do that sort of thing. It's just not, and certainly the ability to do it all the time, it's not human. It's actually with psychokinesis, whether you're moving something physically or affecting something psychically in a physical way, that's even less likely to be fairly regular because there's so many other things that get in the way of human performance. Human performance is a big thing. All right, I just want to finish up with a couple of quick things here. Um, I do want to mention that one thing to make you run from psychics, and we can talk more about the assessing of readings at another time because we're only got a little less than 10 minutes. And I'm glad I got some questions here. Um, this actually happened recently that someone told me that they had gone to see a psychic, and the psychic actually got some real specific information, which is important. You want specifics, names, dates. You may not get named specific dates but you should get some specifics from people, evidential statements, not just general statements. With mediums, the thing that really gets me all the time is when I see a good medium, it feels to me like they're actually talking to somebody. It's more than just an intellectual thing. It really feels like there's some presence there. And there's often these minor personality quirks that are described. And odd sayings and things like that that would not be gleaned from the internet pretty easily. But if you ever see anybody, and this happened again with this person who saw saw the psychic was coming up with some real information, and then the psychic said, "You know, I sense that there is some bad energy around you. You have a curse on you." And if you've noticed any bad things happening with decisions you made and other things, that's because of this curse. I can help you lift that curse. As soon as the word curse or the phrase bad energy, or especially a term like black aura shows up or comes out of discussion, it can come from someone who's legitimately psychic, even a real medium, but it comes from someone who has no ethics or bad ethics. In other words, they're going to take advantage of you. Get up and leave. That's it. You should never, ever buy into the idea that some human being elsewhere has put a curse on you. If there's anything cursing us or causing us bad luck, it's ourselves. There's no reason to believe that paying that psychic any more money. If they offer to do it free, let them do a ritual. That's fine. But under no circumstances pay any more money to remove a curse, to change your aura from black to something else, to do anything else. That is a telltale sign of either a pure phony or someone who is incredibly unethical. The other thing I want to tell you is if you get a reading, you should, especially if it's in person or on Zoom or something else, you should be able to record it. I know with the late Sylvia Browne, for example, she would tell people that when they want to get a recording of the reading, she would say, "No, I don't let my clients record the reading. People told me that the reason for this," Sylvia would say, "is that her energy would often break the device, and she doesn't want to be responsible for that." And to me, I would say I'm willing to take the chance because that's going to prove you're psychic. If that's something that happens on a regular basis with recorders, I'll bring in 10 recorders. I want to see that happen every single time. That tells me what you're doing is psychic. So this is something that phony psychics don't want you to do because when you listen to the recording, you find out how much you spoke, how much information you gave them that was later used within the session, and sometimes how many questions they actually ask you. So just be aware that there are some telltale signs here to avoid a bad reading. Um, okay, here, let's see. Was his impressions reminding you of remote viewing in some way? Sounds like a great reading. With Dyke's Horn, I don't know that it was remote viewing per se. And want to talk about remote viewing the future, maybe, because I guess anything that far in advance it's a remote future. But it's nothing like, remote viewing is more, even if it's precognitive remote viewing, it's about specific locations or things that are going on. So, and remote viewing is a form of clairvoyance. It's a form of ESP. It's just a fancy name for picking up information at a distance, whether it is through space or through time and space. That's what remote viewing is. About relying testimonies to investigate cases. Wasn't relying on testimonies the only way to judge people on the courts back when there were no before technologies. That is correct. Witness testimony, and you try to interrogate the witnesses, to depose the witnesses. If you're an attorney on each side, you try to get kind of cracks in the story for that. It's bizarre to me that these TV, first of all, it angers me when I've seen on some of these shows, which one of the reasons I don't watch the shows anymore, where they don't want to talk to anybody, or they don't want to rely on anecdotal evidence. Again, witness testimony, the person's experience. But they're perfectly happy to go to the location, do the investigation, and if they experience something, that's valid. If they feel something touching them, that's anecdotal evidence. I don't care if it's on camera, it's still anecdotal evidence. It's still a subjective experience. Or they'll have one person at the publicly haunted location tell them the story and tell you about all the things that people have reported over the years. That's not even and this is happening like in some cases I've seen on TV where the person telling what happened, reports that happened, weren't even their experiences. They weren't even telling firsthand experiences. They were telling, relating hearsay. It wasn't even written down. They heard from somebody who heard from somebody. That's really questionable. But then they dismiss anybody else's, stories that come up. So it's very hypocritical. It makes little sense. And in reality, it's important to know that without a story, even if it's folklore, we got nothing to investigate. And if it is purely folklore, the thing to also remember that haunted places don't necessarily stay haunted forever. If nobody's had an experience in the place for 10 years, there's a good reason for that. Maybe that either nobody's ever been in the place for the last 10 years or that whatever the activity was is no longer happening. That's there. When I get asked to investigate cases, there's three conditions I will not investigate, and I'm going to finish up on this point. One, the activity only happened once. Somebody saw a ghost that happened 6 months ago, a year ago. That's all happened, just once. Could have been a real experience, nothing to investigate. Unless there's physical evidence of something, there's nothing to investigate. Listen to them, talk to them, that's fine. It's happened multiple times, but it hasn't happened in the last couple of months. Okay, so we have a pattern. Has this pattern gone before? Did it happen for a few months at one point that stopped and then come back again? Let's kind of figure out when it's going to happen again. We want current and relatively, multiple occurrences of the event. The third time is when folks are unwilling to accept that we are looking for normal explanations first. And I've told my students, don't take a case where they're arguing with you that it's a demon even before you go and do an investigation or find anything. Because if they're not willing to listen to you about alternative explanations, even alternative psychic explanations, it's not worth the time unless you want to battle. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I want to wish you all a happy, a Merry Christmas for those who had. Hopefully, some of you had a happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever your holiday happens to be. Solstice for those who celebrate the solstice, which is what, yesterday and today. Certainly have a happy and safe New Year for everybody. As I've mentioned in other shows, we are skipping 3 weeks. The next show will be in 3 weeks. The first show of 2026 will be January 11th, 2026. I will have a guest. That guest happens to have been connected to one of the TV shows. Steve Gonzalez, who did appear on Ghost Hunters early on, will be with me. So I hope you join us, tell your friends, and it should be a rousing discussion, I think, with Steve. And have great holidays. Be safe. May the force be with you. Thank you, everybody.